Talofa lava, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. I'm Susana Suisuiki. Coming up,
they see themselves next to Australia and New Zealand, which are increasing secular countries.
A priest in PNG doubts the country's intention for Christian declaration. Also,
when this kind of concept is being introduced and this program is introduced, there's always a fear that it will increase injection drug use.
Bluetoothing leads to a spike in HIV cases in Fiji, and Samoa continues to experience power outages. A Catholic priest in Papua New Guinea says being declared a Christian nation may offer the impression that the country will improve, but that's just an illusion. It passed in Parliament with an overwhelming majority of 80 votes in favour and only 4 against. Caleb Fotheringham has more.
The amendment introduces a declaration in the preamble of the Constitution stating, "We acknowledge and declare God the Father, Jesus Christ the Son, and Holy Spirit as our creator and sustainer of the entire universe and the source of our powers and authorities, delegated to the people and all persons within the geographical jurisdiction of Papua New Guinea." Father Giorgio Lassini says becoming a Christian confessional state is a bit out of date in this day and age. He says a healthy separation between church and state is his preference.
We would have preferred not to have a constitutional change in that sense. We didn't see it as necessary, I would say. Besides that, well, to create nowadays in the 21st century Christian confessional state seems a little bit anachronistic.
Mr. Lassini says secular cultures and values are scaring many in PNG, including the recognition and increasing acceptance of the rainbow community. He says declaring PNG as a Christian nation is politicians attempting to protect the nation's identity.
They see themselves as next to Indonesia, which is Muslim. They see themselves next to Australia and New Zealand, which are increasing secular countries. The Pacific heritage is fading, so the question is, who are we?
Mr. Lassini says the money and time spent amending the Constitution could have been spent addressing the nation's problems.
This move that is on paper, on the Constitution, on the Parliament, will be largely cosmetic, will not have a real impact on the life and the attitude and the thinking of the people. PNG society will remain basically what it is. This maneuver may offer the impression or the illusion that things will improve for the country. I mean, the way of behaving or the economic situation or the culture may become more solid, but that is an illusion. I mean, there is a much deeper work to do.
PNG's Prime Minister James Marape, a vocal advocate for the amendment, is happy about the outcome. He says the constitutional amendment reflects the role Christian churches have played in the country's development.
A Fijian academic says even if the government's failed constitutional amendments had made it through the House this week, it would be next to impossible to secure 75% support for it in a national referendum. Prime Minister Sitiveni Rabuka this week sought to amend sections 159 and 160 of the Constitution, which provide for its amendment. The bill passed its first reading with support from several opposition MPs, but failed narrowly at the second reading. Jo Pitarai is an Indigenous Fijian PhD scholar and researcher at the Australian National University. He spoke with Koroi Hawkins about the bill's halted progress through Parliament.
I think the main issue of contention in what was introduced in the bill was really to try and amend the threshold or proposed changes to reduce parliamentary majority that was required initially, that's captured in the Constitution of 3/4 to 2/3. And their claims that aligns with the 1997 Constitution. It's really interesting in the sense that there's arguments over procedure. There's arguments over process and procedure. When the irony of it is that there's a huge procedural credibility question in the whole establishment of the 2013 Constitution. And I think that will be a recurring issue. But that became the point of contention, and it went past the first reading, and 4 opposition MPs were given, I suppose, acrimonious spotlighting and varieties of claims and so on, or siding too much with the government of the day. And then, of course, in this current vote, or the recent vote, it didn't work out as was intended, which was to secure 3/4 of the 55, which would have been 41. So they didn't secure the 41 votes, only settled on 40 votes. And so the bill could not proceed on to the next stage, which is the third reading. And so that's where it stands for the moment.
Any insights as to why the initial opposition, you mentioned there some of the spotlighting they received, but why the support for the bill that was there for the first reading was withdrawn for the second reading?
So generally, I mean, and I have to clarify for your audience, a few of us who are Pacific scholars from the region come from within the heartland of these particular political contentions. So we see things upwards, mostly because we're born and raised within the dynamics of this politics, and we see it across horizontally. There's a general discussion that we follow insofar as not only opposition members, but also their supposed voter base. And what the conversations are about is effectively that there is a general agreement, or understanding that the Constitution needs to be reviewed. And the premise for that understanding or general argument is the fact that we can't have a document that is so closed. However, the issue is about process. Opposition is arguing that process is not followed insofar as having to amend that particular section. But it's worth noting that the original design of the Constitution was intended to make it difficult to amend. That is not only something that the government of the day would claim. Legal experts have already stated that numerous times, that it was by design made difficult to change. And so that then came to a head in the second sort of process of the debate of the second reading. Again, that's why I said originally it's interesting, if not ironic, because it's an argument over procedure when there's a huge procedural credibility question over the establishment of the Constitution in itself, not just this amendment. So it's sort of a recurring theme in this whole debacle.
In recent times, a very different context, but Vanuatu's parliament had to do a constitutional change, which had to go to a referendum, and that got through. Hypothetically, if this had gone through, how likely would it have been to get the required threshold in a national referendum in Fiji, do you think, as required by the Constitution?
There are a number of things at play here that's worth recognizing. Evidently, of course, Vanuatu has a different population dynamic. Vanuatu also has a different ethnic composition insofar as the nation state, an overarching aspect of the nation state is concerned. But certainly the issue of a referendum is always at the forefront of certain discussions about changes. Fiji, on the other hand, has its own complexity insofar as military coups are concerned, and of course the ethnic fabric of the society that we see. The other aspect that's fairly recent, and I think this also needs to be stated, which it informs a bit of a chuckle in a way, that when it came to the salary increases of the MPs, the votes kind of indicated a rather appealing support and somewhat appealing consensus generally, with the exception of a few members. However, on this particular front, it's quite divided. And the reason why referendum is going to be difficult is on those two fronts. Public trust in the parliament, I can say, is at an all-time low. And there was a difficulty in continuing any level of trust after the 2022 elections, noticing not only big players like Fiji First fall apart, and of course the main vote getter having to sort of almost abandon his post, is the fact that the salary increases have damaged public confidence and trust. In addition to that, voter turnout has been not only declining, it has been drastically declining since the 2014 elections. So to ask the people, by registered voters by 3/4 to show interest in a constitutional review is next to impossible.
Fiji's surge in HIV cases is suspected to be linked to Bluetoothing, where blood is shed from someone who's used methamphetamine. The country declared an HIV outbreak in January this year after more than 1,000 cases were detected in 2024, 3 times the number in 2023. Dr. Michelle O'Connor from Asham Health told Caleb Fotheringham many countries around the world were able to reduce the spread of HIV infection with clean needle and syringe programs.
There's various factors. One is the methamphetamine use, which has been reported to have been increasing over the last few years. And HIV is transmitted when we're looking at methamphetamine use through needle syringe sharing. So it's needle sharing, particularly the process of what's called Bluetoothing, which is where somebody injects methamphetamines into their blood and somebody else withdraws that blood and injects it into themselves. And it's a kind of way of sharing the drug. But it also shares blood, and it also shares infections like HIV and hepatitis C. So that's one of the main reasons, or our belief is one of the main reasons behind the outbreak, as well as the other route of transmission, which is unsafe sexual practices. And probably a bit of a reduction in focus during things like COVID, when health priorities had to shift. There's probably been a reduction in focus on prevention, and so we are seeing this increase.
Bluetoothing, I don't understand how that would work. I would have assumed that the drug would have been so diluted in someone's blood by the time it gets to the other person that it wouldn't actually give that much of a high. So do you know why this is such a big deal?
Yeah, look, I'm not a medical doctor and I can't tell you the science behind it, but my understanding is that it does still give a hit. And so if a drug is hard to access, or syringes are hard to access if it's expensive, then whilst it probably doesn't have a full impact, it's still going to have some kind of effect on the individual. And it's also not just unique to Fiji. I have heard about this practice taking place in some countries in Africa as well, and possibly elsewhere. So I don't understand the science behind it, but I do. My understanding is that it does increase it does enable people to share the drug.
How could Fiji resolve this issue? Would giving out clean syringes help?
Yes, absolutely. That would help. Fiji Ministry of Health is looking at various methods to help contain the outbreak. And I believe one of those is through harm reduction, which is the way to go. The access to clean needles and syringes is really the way we have managed this in Australia, and many countries around the world have been able to reduce the spread of HIV infection through injection drug use with clean needle and syringe programs.
Is that a hard sell in a place like Fiji? Would people be concerned that it could just encourage more drug use?
Yes, I think that is often the concern when it's a new program, and Fiji hasn't had a harm reduction program before in terms of needle and syringe use. So I think, again, in many countries, when this kind of concept is being introduced and this program is introduced, there's always a fear that it will increase injection drug use. But evidence shows that that's not the case. It just protects people from infections.
Samoa's power supply woes continue as the country's public electricity corporation announces ongoing outages and power rationing measures. The outages have affected homes and businesses, frustrating the public. And joining me to talk more on this is our Samoa correspondent, Tipi Autangawaya. Talofa Tipi, how many days or weeks has Samoa been experiencing power outages?
Well, since the last 2 weeks that we had power outages for the island of Apolu alone, we now been informed by the Electric Power Corporation that power is now rationing for the next couple of weeks, hoping that the 2 new generators will arrive and then for the Electric Power Corporation to be installed and able to solve the problem that we have now of very limited power supply.
You've said that Upolu's been experiencing power outages for a couple of weeks, but what about Savaii and all the other little islands? Are they affected as well?
There's no problem in Savaii the last couple of weeks, but Savaii had experienced some power outages. I remember from towards the end of January up until the month of February, but it's all been fixed. The generators has been fixed, but now Upolu Island had experienced the same problem.
You've said that EPC have come out with some statements, but what's actually causing the power outages?
Well, according to the EPC, because we all relying on the EPC to tell us what went wrong, there was some maintenance work for the underground electric power, high voltage power line around that area where the Faleata Golf Course is, or the Faleata Ports ground there, where these underground cables, very high voltage one, connected the Fianga power station and the Fuluoso power station. So those underground cable have been, the water was able to get through and then cause a lot of problems in some of the connections.
In the meantime, how are the public coping, or have they just been rationing their power as recommended by EPC?
Well, at least it's now been rationing, and they're telling the different areas of Upolu what time the power will go off and what time will come back, because in the last couple of weeks, the whole island just went off like that. And then it took about 7-8 hours until the power comes back. But now, since the rationing of power supply is again underway for the island of Upolu, at least they're telling us now that this area is going to go off on what time and come back on what time. But, if the power is going to be rationing like this for the next couple of weeks, the public is still a huge outcry from the public of some families. Their electrical appliances have been ruined, and some other problems. But the EPC is now advising the families, to make sure to call them for any technical or electrical problem they saw in their homes, and make sure to turn off their appliances before the power will go off.
It'll definitely be frustrating for local residents, but how are visitors or tourists, how are they coping with the power outages?
Yeah, very frustrating for the public in general. But I know the businesses is one of the areas that's being hit hard with this power outages. And now I've seen quite a number of hotels, restaurants, and even big shops. The big shops in town are now using generators, standby generators, to be able to have still servicing their customers. But it's not a good thing to have power outages for like more than 4 or 5 hours. It's not good.
That's Pacific Waves for today. For all episodes, head over to rnz.co.nz/Pacific. We're also on Spotify, Apple and iHeartRadio. From myself and the RNZ Pacific team, tō whā sui fua.